So let's get right into this incredible story. The year is 1589. A man named Peter Stump, a pretty wealthy farmer, is executed in what has to be one of the most gruesome public spectacles of the entire 16th century. And the charge? Get this, that he was a werewolf who had been terrorizing the German town of Bedburg for 25 years. But the real story here? Oh, it is so much more complicated than just a simple monster hunt.
To really wrap our heads around what happened, you have to picture the world Peter Stump lived in. This was not some peaceful, idyllic time. The trial happened smack in the middle of the really devastating Cologne War. The whole region was in a state of absolute total chaos. You had these brutal mercenary armies just roaming the countryside, looting and killing whoever they wanted.
And this is the key to the whole thing. The Catholic authorities, they desperately needed to get control back. And Peter Stump, he became the perfect target. By painting him as this monster, they could take all that free-floating terror and violence from the war and just focus it, laser-like, onto this one guy. They literally made him the face of all their fears.
And that is the question, isn't it? The one that's haunted this story for over 400 years. Was Peter Stump just a depraved killer, a supernatural beast, or was he something else entirely? To figure that out, we really need to dig into how a society on the verge of collapse can end up creating its own monsters.
Okay, so let's really set the scene here, because a legend this wild doesn't just pop up out of thin air. No, it grows out of a very specific, very chaotic kind of soil.
The timeline is absolutely everything here. This war raged for 6 long years, and it completely tore the region apart. And right there, at the very peak of all this devastation, in 1589, you get the trial. That is no coincidence. You can draw a straight line from the chaos of the war right to this trial.
You know, sociologists actually have a word for this kind of situation: anomie. It's when all the rules, the norms, the things that hold a society together, they just dissolve. There's no law, no order, just pure survival. And in an environment like that, extreme violence, it becomes horrifyingly normal.
Now check this out, because there were really 2 different enemies at play here. For the Catholic authorities, the official enemy was Protestant heresy. That was their political battle. But for the regular people, the peasants, the enemy was way more immediate and terrifying, these unpaid soldiers plundering their homes. And you know what the people already called these mercenaries? They called them wolves.
And this is where it all clicks into place. Peter Stump wasn't just some random guy. He was a wealthy farmer, and he supposedly had ties to the losing Protestant side of the war. He was the perfect scapegoat. By executing him as a werewolf, the authorities could brilliantly link their political enemy, heresy, with the people's very real enemy, the wolves. It was a masterful and, frankly, a terrifying piece of political theater.
So that's the political angle. But the legend of Peter Stump, well, it took on a life of its own. Over the centuries, the story got told and retold, and it became this kind of mirror, reflecting the fears of different eras. Let's look at 3 really distinct versions of the monster.
So, in one modern retelling, Stump gets this crazy upgrade. He becomes what's called an alchemical werewolf. In this version, he basically makes a deal with a demon for a magical serum that gives him all these insane powers. We're talking super strength and speed, casting magic with runes, even making himself invisible and paralyzing people with fear. He's not just a guy in a wolf skin anymore. He's a full-on supervillain.
This table kind of breaks it all down for us. You've got the Nietzschean parable, which we're about to get into, that sees the werewolf as the symbol of ultimate power. Then there's the alchemical werewolf we just talked about. That's your pure supernatural horror story. And then you have other versions, like the tale of Silas, which argue the monster isn't real at all. It's just a product of fear and prejudice run amok.
Okay, so the original legend says Peter Stump used a magic belt to transform into a wolf. But what if that belt isn't just a magical prop? What if it's actually a psychological key, a way for us to understand evil itself?
Let's circle back to that philosophical interpretation. This version, which is inspired by the philosopher Nietzsche, sees Stump as a kind of Übermensch, a Superman. The idea is that he wasn't just a killer. He was a man who made a conscious choice to reject society's rules, what he called the comforting lies of the herd morality, because he saw them as a way to keep people weak.
So, in this telling, Stump gets executed not just for his crimes, but because his absolute terrifying freedom was something the herd couldn't handle. He represented a world with no rules, no morality, and they had to destroy him to feel safe again inside their own comfortable prison of rules.
But there's a completely different way to look at this. From a psychological point of view, the magic belt is an invention. It's a story, a psychological fiction that people told themselves, and that maybe Stump told himself to avoid facing a much, much darker truth.
This is a process called externalizing evil. It's pretty straightforward. First, a man commits these absolutely horrific acts. Second, he can't possibly face the fact that he is the source of these violent urges. So third, he invents an external cause. He can say, "The magic belt made me do it." It's not him, you see, it's the magic. It's a comforting lie because it suggests the monster is something separate from us.
And all of this, the philosophy, the psychology, it brings us right back to where we started, the raw, historical trauma of the Cologne War. Because after all the speculation, we have to confront the brutal reality of what was happening on the ground.
So let's just ask the big question. What if there was no magic, no demon, no alchemical serum, and no magic belt? What if the monster wasn't supernatural at all? What if Peter Stump was just a man? A man who lived through a time of unimaginable violence and trauma, and in doing so, became a monster himself.
And here's maybe the most chilling detail in the entire story. The way the state executed Peter Stump, tearing his flesh with hot pincers, breaking his bones on the wheel, it was a direct mirror of the savage crimes the werewolf was accused of. The state, in its quest to restore order, became just as monstrous as the thing it was trying to destroy.
And this leads us to the most unsettling conclusion possible. If the magic belt is just a story we tell ourselves to feel safe, if all the supernatural stuff is just window dressing, then what are we really left with?
We're left with the idea that the monster isn't some external force that comes from the outside. It's part of the human condition itself, something that can be awakened by extreme trauma and violence, just like what happened during the Cologne War. And if that's true, then the horror isn't something you can kill on an executioner's wheel. It's always with us. It is inescapable.
And so, the story of Peter Stump leaves us wrestling with this one final haunting question. In times of profound chaos and suffering, when the lines between right and wrong completely blur and survival is all that matters, where do you draw that line? Where exactly does the monster end and the man begin?